And yeah, the classic story of like that was like motivating, like I didn't give up, like I could have just quit, but I became the manager and I was the best scorekeeper and blah 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 blah. And then I became a starting like shooting guard sophomore year, which is true, but yeah,
Yeah.
anyway. Um that's my second essay.
You beat out the other like six other kids that you're competing in the 39
Yeah.
Yeah.
person squad.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't even like basically there were only like two people got cut because like not there were only like 14 people going into 12 spots. And I was like, wow, like that's really bad. But the other problem was my growth spurt came my sophomore year. So I was really short. I was like
Mm.
4'11", 5'1", maybe like 5'0".
Oh,
So
wow.
again, like I'm using that as an excuse. I probably just wasn't that good. Like I can't really compete against like the 6'6" guy who's like maybe like really like not that good, but he's just really tall. So yeah, like that's an
Yeah.
asset on the team than me, who's like a skinny little kid from
Yeah.
Korea.
Yeah. Yeah.
My like main question to you here, Tay, is that if you think about all the chapters of your life that you've been through, how would you define all these chapters up until today?
Hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, great to meet you all, whoever is going to actually end up watching this, which might be a very low number, but I will still
We
say
might
hi.
be we might be talking to ourselves right now,
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly.
You know?
So
Just
hello, Eddie and Steven, and maybe one other person who opens this link. Um, My name is Tay. I was 2011 originally from Harvard, ended up graduating 2013, did the 2-year military service between my sophomore and junior years. I was brother BabyFace. I am struggling to keep that going. It's been much
you
more
honestly look like maybe younger. It's kind of
there's no
kind of
way
crazy.
it's
You look wow,
possible.
amazing.
Yes, I have definitely a new chapter in my life, 2 kids now, so I can go into it in a lot more detail. Chapters of my life, man, where to start? I mean, I guess the first chapter is I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and the first chapter was up to age 5-ish when I was living there, and that part of the chapter I don't remember at all. So I was born there, I lived there, and then the big shift in my life was when our family moved to Kingsport, Tennessee. It's a tiny town in East Tennessee, and we were there for 3.5 years. And that was my and our family's first foray into the US. Like, we didn't speak a word of English. My dad worked for a US chemicals company, and it just turned out that their headquarters were in Tennessee. And I think later on, my mom told me this, but it was supposed to be like a 12 to 18-month thing for him to go there and get like executive training. But it ended up being 3.5 years. And so I don't know if that's what we originally signed up for, but that's what ended up happening. But it was very important, if I reflect on my life, that I had that experience because I was just thrown into public school from kindergarten to second grade, didn't speak a word of English. My older sister, who's 3 years older than me, we both were just trying to like figure it out. And I think our family just had no clue. We were so naive. We didn't know anything about the US. We were just really excited to go to McDonald's all the time. But I learned English, which was a huge part of what has helped me in my life and my career and school since then. And it gave us a little bit of that glimpse of the global network and what is possible outside of Korea. So we get a taste of that for 3 years. And I say that's probably chapter 2. Chapter 3 is when I go back to Korea. I go to elementary and middle school there from grades 2 through basically 7th grade. And very typical Korean upbringing, a lot of like hagwons and studying and, various activities, but just a, very normal life, like nothing that different. Just went to public school in front of our apartment complex. Always studied hard and worked hard, but, a very typical Korean upbringing. Chapter 4, which was very short, but also very important, was actually we moved to China for about a year. And so for the same company my dad was at, he was now asked to go to Beijing and China to do some joint ventures. And so we moved to China. This was back in like 2001 era. And this was when like everyone was like going crazy about China. Like, you got to go to China. China's the thing. You got to go learn Mandarin. And so our parents were excited for us to go experience China as well. And so I went to international school there. And my sister, who was actually already in the US, back in the US for boarding school, she was actually pulled back. And so my parents wanted her to get the US experience too. And then 6 months later, the SARS pandemic happened. And
Mm.
so if you recall, there was this big epidemic that happened. And so we were actually literally required to leave the country because we were expats. And so we went back to Korea and we were like, uh-oh, what do we do? This whole like Beijing, China internationalization thing that we thought was kind of interesting is very difficult to predict now. And then my sister, who was already in boarding school, was like, I just want to go back to the US. And so when she was coming back to that same school that she was at, which was in North Carolina, she was like, do you want to come with me? And so I ended up saying yes, partially because I was just so naive and didn't know what else to say. So I just went with her. And this school was in Asheville, North Carolina, also another relatively random place for a boarding school to be at. But when my sister, who's older than me, was thinking about coming back to the US, my parents were like happy to be supportive, but you have to go to a school that is driving distance from Kingsport, Tennessee, because that is the only place that we know any human being in the entire country. And so she pulled out literally a map. Back then there were no Google Maps, and she drew a circle around Kingsport, Tennessee with a 90-minute driving distance. And then she started to flip through this like big boarding school book to find any school that was in that vicinity. And there was just one random, relatively highly ranked school called Asheville School in Asheville, North Carolina. So she started to look it up, somehow decided to apply, got in. The other school that she could have applied to ended up being an all-boys school, so there was no other choice. And she ended up going, and she really liked it. And so that's how I ended up in Asheville, North Carolina for high school. And again, that was another big chapter of life because it brought me back to the US, and it was a very interesting boarding school experience, a very small one. My graduating class was 39 people, so very, very small. And yeah, and then of course, like the next big chapter was when I went to Harvard. Looking back, going to Harvard, of course, was a huge deal. And I'm sure a lot of people, as in the one other person listening to this right now, is probably might have had a similar experience, right? Like the moment you got in, I mean, I still vividly remember. And honestly, like in high school and a lot before that, like I never imagined that such thing could happen, right? I like vaguely knew what it was, but like I always thought like aliens went to those schools, right? I was like, there's no way. Like, how would I, as this like random kid from Korea, like ever even imagine, right? And one thing led to another, and it just happened. And so that was truly life-changing and a very big part of who I am today.
I'm actually curious when
my chapters here.
When you were applying to go to Harvard, what do you think allowed you to get accepted? Like, what do you think was the distinct stories that you told to the admissions office?
It's still a mystery. I don't know why they did.
Don't be humble. We know. You know.
Honestly, one of the triggers of me applying, I applied early. That's when there were still early applications. I think they brought it back, actually, right? They got rid of it for a little while, and maybe they brought it back.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. But I honestly just didn't know if I could apply to such schools. Like I just like didn't really think of college as being like this ultimate goal. I just like was having fun at school. And the head of the school one day pulled me over at breakfast. Because I used to go to breakfast a little early just to grab the food when it was hot. And he was just sitting there and he was like, where are you going to apply to colleges? And I was like, I honestly don't know. I should probably start thinking about it. And he was like, have you thought about Harvard? And I was like, I mean, I know what Harvard is. Like,
How old were you? Was you a junior or senior?
This was when I was like, probably junior / like early senior year when I had to like really think about it. And he was like, I think you should really think about it. And honestly, like the head of the school, like I didn't know him super well. Like, of course, like it's a small school, we know each other, but he wasn't like my advisor. He wasn't my direct teacher or anything. But I don't know. He just like really encouraged me to think about it. And then I like kind of started looking into it. I visited the school and I was like, wow, like this is amazing, right? Like, I mean, just the campus and like the people there. And then like if I think about what ended up allowing me to get accepted, like I don't know, like when I got in, I did actually ask one of the admissions folks, like, can you just give me like a rough sense of like how you guys think about these things? Because honestly, like I have no idea, right? And the way she articulated it, and maybe this is common knowledge, she was like, there are generally two buckets of people at Harvard. One are exceptional at one thing. They're just like the best. They're like Olympians, like gold medalists and some math Olympiad. And then there's another bucket of people who are generally really, really good at a lot of things. And I'm definitely in the second bucket. Like I was not an Olympian. I was not like an archery gold medalist, but I was pretty good at a lot of things. Like I was a good student. I was valedictorian. I was, editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. I did a lot of things, and none of that was like, I really don't think any of those things were, uh, you know, forced in some sense. I just really enjoyed it and really immersed myself into the school. Part of the triggering of why I worked so hard and why I wanted to take advantage of the school when I was in boarding school was like, I just felt this sort of deep sense of like responsibility that I like really should not screw this up because, like these schools are really expensive. And I just felt like, man, like if my parents have worked this hard to give me this type of opportunity, I really don't want to screw it up. And so I worked really hard. There was no like end goal per se. There was no like particular like angle that I was trying to figure out to get into a good college, but I just worked really hard within the environment that I was at. And maybe because of it, I was able to do a lot of things within that environment that maybe the admissions folks felt like was, good enough to get admitted. So I don't know, but that was generally how they described the buckets, and I was like, yeah, probably more of the second bucket.
Yeah. What did you write your college essay on?
Let's see. What were they? The first one, there were 2 essays. The first one was around, I volunteered at this community center in Seoul every summer when I was in high school. It was actually an after-school program for autistic kids. And they were actually like my age. So they were like high school kids, middle school kids. And I started volunteering there because it was literally like 2 blocks away from our apartment. And I heard of the program and my mom heard of it. And she was like, yeah, like that's a really good cause. Like, let's just go help them. And it was really interesting because the teachers there never had volunteers who were like my age, right? A lot of the volunteers were like old people who had a lot of time after retiring and things like that. But when I showed up, they were like, oh, that'll be amazing because they don't have a lot of peers who are interested in hanging out with them, right? And so I just started to doing that. And then the essay was about how initially there was this sense of like, yeah, it was like it felt really good to do it, but I didn't really know what this was all for. Like, I kind of like just did it, partially because I felt like it was the right thing to do, but partially because it was like, I don't know, like a good summer activity, honestly. Like, I just like didn't have a lot of other things to do. And then like towards the 3rd or 4th year of doing it, right, towards the end of it, like I felt like I learned so much from them as much as they probably learned about life and other things from me. And so the essay was about how there are a lot of different ways to build connections with people from very different backgrounds, let alone people with disabilities, and how we should sort of embrace each other and have an open mind about it. Because I was in some sense very closed-minded about like, what am I really going to get out of this other than feeling good about myself? But then towards the end of it, there were all these examples that I shared about like, yeah, like they show me the power of being persistent or like being like, truly caring of each other, things like that. And, I think that was one of the essays. The other essay was I got cut from the JV basketball team my freshman year. So it was like
Just like Michael Jordan. Right,
yeah,
right.
basically Michael
like
Jordan.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, the classic story of like that was like motivating. Like I didn't give up. Like I could have just quit, but I became the manager and I was the best scorekeeper and blah 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 blah. And then I became a starting like shooting guard sophomore year, which is true. But yeah, anyway, that's my second essay.
You beat out the other like 6 other kids that you were competing in the 39
Yeah.
person school.
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't even like basically there were only like 2 people got cut because like not there were only like 14 people going into 12 spots, and I was like, wow, like that's really bad. The other problem was my growth spurt came my sophomore year, so I was really short. I was like 4'11", 5'1", maybe like 5'0". So
Oh, wow.
again, like I'm using that as an excuse. I probably just wasn't that good, but like I can't really compete against like the 6'6" guy who's like maybe like really like not that good, but he's just really tall. So yeah, like that's an asset on the team than me, who's like a skinny little kid from Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
I wanna. All right. Well, just a thought that I had, and is going back to what you said about motivation and not really like having an angle or having a master plan to get into a great school when you were in college, and you said that your parents, you had them in mind a lot, in terms of kind of not wanting to quote unquote mess it up and not want to waste an opportunity. Did you feel like directly or indirectly at all that your parents had put upon that expectation on you, whether it was like said or unsaid? And also, and then if not, was it more so again self-propelled and self-motivated in terms of you wanting to do all these different things and like do your best at it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually reflected on this quite a bit because I often wondered, like, what was that motivation and the drive? And I actually think it goes even further back than my parents. So I think it's really from my grandparents that it all started. So
Mm,
on my mother's side, both of my grandparents were part of the escape from North Korea during the Korean War.
mm,
So they're originally from North Korea. And during the Korean War, there's like a movie about this where there was a mass exodus, right? As the North Koreans learned about this whole like communist thing, they like all escaped on a boat.
Mhm.
They were literally on that boat. And so
yeah.
they escaped. Like my grandfather had like 10 siblings, of which only like five made it. And then my grandmother was already married to my grandfather, so they escaped together. And even for her, only like two of her three siblings made it, or something like that. So they actually,
Oh wow.
until recently, had siblings still living in North Korea, and I think
Mm,
most of them passed away at this point. But they came with nothing, like literally nothing. And so they were very entrepreneurial in some sense. Like my grandfather was a lifelong military guy, so he served in the military for 30 something years. So he did the military thing. And then in the meantime, my grandmother did a lot of these different businesses while raising four kids.
Mhm.
mhm,
Mhm.
And then they ended up being very successful in various ways and made a good amount of money. And that was really what supported them to have all of their four kids go to college. And then, of course, even having all the grandchildren getting really good education, like they were a big part of that. And so I mean, my grandmother used to tell me all these crazy stories, right? Like she would be like, yeah, like I still remember when we were escaping, like we were kind of hiding in like a bunker and like a bomb just like literally like exploded like 2 meters away and like they couldn't like hear for a little while. You know, stuff like that. You're like, oh my
mm,
God, this is just, we are so privileged to be
Mhm.
living in this world. And maybe that's changing today because there's a lot of stuff going on around the world. But
Mhm.
like, yeah, like I mean, those things really implant in you a sense of gratitude and a sense of responsibility. And there was a
mm,
saying that someone told me, I don't know if this is like a real thing or not, but someone told me this a long time ago when I was growing up, and they were like, there's a saying, maybe in Korea, that it takes three generations to get to a really awesome generation. So in other
mm,
words, it's three generations have to sacrifice
Mhm.
for one of the generations to do really, really well. It could be economically, it could be socially, whatever it is. And I actually kind of feel like it took three generations for us to get here too. Like it was my
mm,
Mhm.
grandparents and my parents who sacrificed a lot. And then here we are in the third generation, at least that I know of. And I'm like, yeah, like this is like we should be, or at least I should be exceedingly thankful for
mm,
all of the things that they've done for me to have this opportunity. Right. And so I
Mhm.
don't think there was any like enforced sense of pressure in earnest. Like, if anything, my parents were generally like, yeah, don't be too stressed. Like, life will be
mm,
okay. But I think a lot of it, for some reason, maybe this is just the way I was raised or born, but like those things had a big impact on the way I think I sort of operate. And so a lot of it was, I think, self-driven, which as I was reflecting on this over the years, I was trying to like trace back exactly what could be
mm,
this. And I do think there's a lot of the gratitude to the family that drives a lot of it. Like I go back to Korea once a year and see my parents, my grandparents, my
mm,
grandfather and my dad's side all passed away. My grandmother is 93, 94, and she's still relatively healthy, although I can see her getting pretty frail over the last year or two.
mhm,
Mhm.
So yeah, that still motivates me a lot. I think in some sense, I mean, there's no like I mean, there's definitely another renewed sense of motivation in a very different way once you have kids. That is for
Mhm.
sure.
right.
And you to talk about that. But I don't know. Like, I don't think there's something that I can pinpoint to being like, yeah, this is like what really drives me these days, or like this is what really motivates me. I mean, a lot of it is also finding the work that you really love. And I really like what I
Mhm.
do, which is technology investing these days. And so
Mhm.
luckily, I've landed in a profession that gives me a lot of energy. I know that might not be true for a lot of people. So from a
Mm,
professional standpoint, that's been really great. And then on the family side, my wife Haley, who many of you, again, the two people who are listening might know her, but she was also class of 2011 from Harvard. So we were
right.
classmates and blocking group mates. And we dated for like 7 years before we got married. And so I was very lucky to find a spouse during college and had a very long relationship with her And then with that, we've also been married for now many, many years with 2 kids. And so just, I think on the family side, I also got very lucky that I found someone really relative to others, someone who I could really trust and call my partner. And then to have that stability, I think allows me to not be so distracted about a lot of other stuff, right? And so I don't know, I think I feel very lucky that both the professional and the personal have worked out relatively smoothly
Right.
post like college. And I do think that is a huge part of what continues to give me a lot of self motivation and gratitude, because I also understand that that might not be the case for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Actually, going to.
But yeah, just kind of connecting your family motivations that you mentioned when you were younger, and now that you're a father of 2, right? And you said you've been married for a while, so being both a father and a husband, right? Because I feel like those 2 roles are obviously they're similar, but they can be quite different, right? And like I'm just curious as to how your foundation of family, which sounds quite strong, and at least and your sense of family is very strong, right? I don't think that's for everyone really. I think you yourself say like you were able to just be sensitive to what the value of family at an early age. So that being built as you were younger, and now that you are, kind of the head of your family now, as both a husband and a father, like what things have carried over, and what things are you now seeing, being a grown man yourself, of how you want to like lead your family and kind of establish your own like foundation.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're actually totally winging this. So that's great. Let's see. I told this to some of my friends as well. So my son Theo, he's turning 6 this week on Halloween Day. He's a Halloween baby.
Wow, that's crazy.
And my
6.
daughter
Wow.
Gia is 2.5 years old. So still 2 young kids. When Theo was born, which was actually when I was in business school, so this was my second year at the GSB, he was born, and I ended up having this luxury of spending a lot of time with him because I was still in school. And so what I did was I pulled all of my classes into Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I just didn't go to school. I just took care of
Sure.
Theo. And so Haley was on mat leave for 4 months, and then she went back to work. And then the moment she went back to work, I was the primary caregiver in some sense of Theo for many months until we graduated and I started working again. And I thought that was, in hindsight, one of the best things that could have ever happened to me, because I was able to spend that much time with a newborn. I think we just live in a different society right now that allows us to be a little bit more open to having the dads be involved this way. But the first few months of that experience also gave me the level of appreciation and the desire to do that for my kids that, frankly, like even though I have a great relation with my dad and, I'm very grateful for everything he did, like he just wasn't as around as I would love to be for my kids, right? And so I think the way I approach it now is everyone's busy, work's busy, whatever, but I really try to do my best to be there for them. And so, for instance, on a day-to-day basis, I try really, so I'm actually going to go pick him up after this. So I pick him up from school, and then from like 5:30-ish, which is dinner time, until whenever they go to bed, like 8:39-ish, like I try to block off everything. So try really hard to not look at my phone. I really try hard to not look at email, and I'm trying my best to be present. And then on the weekends, like we're doing a lot of stuff as well. But like those are some of the things that I'm trying to intentionally include in my life, so that yes, we can get carried on with our lives and different dimensions, but you have to prioritize. And what I'm trying to prioritize is trying to be as present as I can with my kids when I can.
How do you feel like you learned or are continuing to learn to be a good father, especially given, to your point on the differences between maybe the previous generation and kind of the times that we live in today?
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know if I'm a good dad, and I don't think there's a manual for it. I think the most important thing is just being present. And sometimes it's actually really hard. Like these kids are very demanding. They'll be like, "Can you read me a book?" I'm like, "Of course." And then you read a book, and you're like, "Okay, like, are we done?" And then there are like 7 more books coming, and you're like, "Oh my God, like, like I'm losing my voice here." It's a lot of work, but
That's when you pull up and you're like, "Oh, this is the seed pitch of this new company that's ready to be SaaS."
Yeah, let's
What do you think?
sales model together. I actually don't know. I mean, I'd love to keep learning and getting better at it, but I think the most important thing is to make sure that you have the energy and the intention to be present. And honestly, the intention part is maybe even easier than the energy part. The energy part is actually really hard. Like, I mean,
Mm,
after a hard day at work, like you're exhausted, right? But then to go home and like really be present with their kids, like that requires a ton of energy. And
Hmm.
so like one of the like I try to work out as regularly as I can. That's been really hard too, actually, to squeeze that into the schedule. But whenever I can, I try to work out. And honestly, like one of the big reasons for it is that I need the energy to just like keep up with the kids.
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think in some sense you have to just balance your day and your schedule so that you have enough time with them and then hopefully the energy to actually be present with them.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, I'm curious, how has your relationship, your partnership with Haley
Oh yeah, yeah.
evolved, especially after having your two kids? In what ways, especially in the way that you didn't foresee or expect for your partnership to kind of change and evolve? Yeah, what does that look like?
It's a great question. I mean, I think I just got really lucky because I mean, if people here know like the MBTI personality test, um, so I'm an ENTJ and Haley's an ENTJ as well. So we're actually very similar in a lot of ways. And then there was this whole chart that came up where it showed like the different types of MBTIs, whether they like each other,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah,
And it turned out that ENTJs like each other. So, like,
Mm,
I
oh,
see
okay, that's
that.
really interesting that we are not only similar in personalities, but it shows that this type of personality likes and gravitate towards others who are also similar. Maybe that is recipe for very low diversity of thought or whatever, but like in any case, that makes a lot of things much easier because we seem to just view the world very similarly. We have very similar priorities, value systems. So we've basically never really fought since we've started dating and
no
started.
way. Like even until now,
Yeah, we like rarely. We just. I mean, we have disagreements, and like
it's actually
differences of
incredible.
what to do. But like, we're both relatively like rational about things. Like, we don't
Mm,
get super emotional about these things, and so we just talk it through and commit and just move on. Like 80%, 90% of those things get automatically solved because we have very similar value systems, I think.
Hmm.
mm,
In terms of how things have evolved since the kids, very different for sure. Like I think getting married from being in a relationship was basically an extension, like not that different. Um, Once you have kids, yeah, things change for sure. Like I mean, you just don't have enough time for each other.
mm,
And so that's actually one thing that we're trying to do better at. Like we haven't
Hmm.
done a great job in the last few years carving out time just for the two of us. Situationally, it's been harder because our parents are all in Korea, so we don't have any family around here in the Bay Area. So we don't have someone immediately who can just call and be like, "Hey, like, can you just come over and like take care of our kids while we go out for dinner?" So we have
yeah,
to always pre-plan things, and we have like nannies and sitters that we try to access, but like, you have to give them like a week's notice, right? And so it's just hard for us to plan anything between the
mm,
two of us these days. But I do think we need to do a better job of it because our whole lives are currently consumed around our kids. That's great, and that also is another unifying mechanism because we're so
right.
focused on it and making sure that we are the best parents that we can and can for both of them. But I do feel like they're like like basically like what we try to do is if the kids go to bed early, like we try to like turn on Netflix and like start watching it together and like have a wine or whatever it is. But
Mm,
then like oftentimes we're so tired that we just like fall asleep. So like we just need to have more intentional ways to hang out
mm,
between the two of us because the few times we've done it, it's just magical, right? It just feels like,
right,
man, it's just a special time to rekindle that like special relationship that you have when you're like in a dating relationship, right? And
right.
it's hard to like have that environment when you have two crazy kids running around and like, throwing stuff at you. And so
Yeah.
I think we need to do a better job of it. Things have definitely changed, but overall, like I think we've been very lucky because of that sort of unified value system helping us not really have to worry too much about a lot of other things.
As you were making all the transitions, it was pretty clear, or a clear answer, at least in your mind, that she was going to be the one for you and that she was going to be your wife.
I think so. And for some reason, I like when we had that conversation about like, oh, like I really like you, but like I'm just going to this military thing. Like I only brought that up because I had this weird feeling that like if we're gonna start dating, like I had the hunch that she might be the one I end up marrying, and so I
Wow.
didn't want to make that ask lightly, and
Mm.
so I hesitated for such a long time because I'm like, well, like I don't want to screw it up, right? I didn't want to be like the let's dabble into this relationship and then break up and all that stuff, right? So, and I honestly didn't know what she would say because she'd be like, she could have been like, well, I don't want to wait for 2 years, like there could be
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I don't know. Like I just felt like because I mean maybe the other benefit was that we were just really good friends for quite a while, right? All of freshman
Mm.
year and part of sophomore year. So, when you hang out like that for a year and a half, you kind of you really know each other. Like there are no
Mhm,
Right.
secrets.
mhm,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow.
mhm.
Full journey, full journey. Um,
The other chapter, Tay, I want to even more personally for me ask you about is your professional journey as well.
Mhm.
Because, one thing that you had mentioned earlier is that you feel like you get a lot of energy and really love what you do.
Yeah.
I would imagine that that wasn't necessarily like if you go back to your mind, maybe even high school or in college, maybe you had indication that this is exactly what you want to do and what your life would be
Yeah.
like. But I'm curious, like what the journey looked like and how you kind of came to realize like this is for me and this is my journey.
Oh yeah, like this is all totally serendipitous. Like never did I imagine I would be a VC. I mean, the only VC that I knew was Vince Carter. Like I didn't even know what VC. Yeah, I mean, all of these things were, this the speech that I really really like is the Steve Jobs commencement speech at Stanford where he talks
mm,
about the dots backwards versus forward.
Mm,
hmm
It really resonates with me because all of these things I can connect the dots backwards, but there's no way I would have predicted any of these things ahead of time. Let's see. Morgan Stanley banking was totally because my sister was a banker and she told me that banking is a great first job. I
mm,
come back to campus after sophomore year and then the military. Uh, I'm like, okay, like maybe banking is what I should think about. And a lot of my friends were doing it, because I had all my friends who had already graduated. They were my interviewers. Like I would go to these conferences.
That's amazing.
It would be like the most awkward interview. I would like show up at the first round interview and you generally don't know who it is, right? And then like you go to the career center and you like walk into the room and you're like, oh wait, like didn't we used to do pizzas together? So maybe that helped.
yeah.
But like that was very not like intentional in the sense of like I didn't know that banking would be like my calling post college, but it was
Mm,
situational that my sister gave me some exposure to it and then a lot of my friends were telling me about it. The tech thing was really interesting because the reason I actually studied computer science as my secondary, and I didn't take a single class of CS before I went to the military. And then I was in the military from '09 to 11. And that was when like the iPhone just exploded, right? And
Mm.
so the iPhone came out in '07 and '08, and Haley actually was one of the first users of it. And I was like, that's dumb. Like, that's like, why would you do that? That's expensive. It's clunky. Why don't you have the BlackBerry keyboard? Like, of course you need that. And then I go to the military, and as I mentioned, like, I was totally secluded. I had no internet. I had no phone. And then I came out of the military, and everyone had a smartphone. And I was like, what is going on? And so I started to take CS50 and all these CS classes, and I was like, wow, this is so interesting. For a hot second, I thought I wanted to go into CS and software engineering. And this is when like the Google APM product program was kind of exploding on campus as well. And actually, I attribute this to Michael Cherkassky. I hope you're listening to this as well. Cherk, who was class of 13, he was also a CS guy, and we took a few CS classes together. And my senior year, and this was maybe before, already after I decided to become a banker, but like nonetheless, I really wanted to keep pursuing CS because I was like, oh, this is just so interesting. And Cherk is like, hey, like come take this class with me. I still remember it's like 202 or something like that, CS 202. It was like a grad school course, and I was like, dude, like I'm not that good at this. I'm just like learning it for fun. Like it's just interesting. And he's like, no, we'll do the pieces together. Like it's easy, it's easy. I was like, okay. And it was the hardest class I've ever taken. It was so hard. And I was like,
And that's what Cherk would do.
yeah.
Absolutely, what something Cherk would do.
I thought this was easy. It was like yeah, it's easy to me, but I don't know. I was like, thanks, like appreciate it. But that gave me some insight that okay, maybe I shouldn't be a CS guy, like a software
Yeah.
engineer, but at least it gave me some glimpses of understanding of what the world of computers and software looked like. And so
Mm,
the banking thing and then the CS thing combined made the tech investing journey very logical. And then when we
mm,
moved out here, part of the reason we moved out to the Bay Area was because Haley went to Stanford for business school as well. So she was moving out here. And so I found a job out here with when she was moving out. And yeah, like none of these things were planned. Like I just
Mm,
kind of like figured it out along the way. In some sense, I think that journey would have been much easier if I had people in my life who were like telling me like you're supposed to do this, but I just didn't. And I don't think a lot of people do, frankly, unless like I don't know, you're like dad did the exact same thing that you're gonna do, right? But that wasn't the case for me. And so every time I was just trying to like figure out like what am I supposed to do? And in earnest, like a lot of the journey was around like feeling, and this kind of goes to the Harvard story too, but like I just like I don't know, maybe it was like a self-confidence thing or whatever, but like I just never thought that these things were possible, or I
mm,
didn't even
mm,
know those things existed. And then the journey is always about understanding what the realms of possibilities are, and then slowly gaining the confidence that, oh, maybe I can do those things, right? Like, oh, I didn't realize I could go work in Wall Street. I thought that was like, again, like an alien thing for me. Like, I thought I
mm,
mm,
needed to go to Asia to work in finance, those types of things. And then you get there and you're like, oh, yeah, like maybe I can be relatively competitive and marketable in this environment too. So I'll just work hard. And then you get
mm,
these jobs and you're like, wow, like this is just so interesting and exciting. And then over time, I think it became clear that I found these jobs and pockets of things that I really enjoyed doing. And so I tried to like double down into the things that I actually really enjoyed rather
mm,
than, trying to again like connect the dots forward and being like, well, I needed to do this to do that. It started to become more of like,
mm,
okay, I kind of understand what these things are now. And so let me
mm,
just zone into the things that I actually really enjoy.
mm,
mm.
mm.
And what were those things that you really realized that you enjoy?
I really enjoy the craft of investing. I think it's just like a really fun thing to think about risk reward, to think about putting money to work, to multiply that. I think that whole concept is just really fascinating. I love technology. I just feel like technology changes the world in ways that is just unimaginable. And then I love working with people who are actually doing it. So the founders, the CEOs, the people who are actually doing it. I just gain a lot of energy from just meeting them and hearing their stories and trying to learn as much as I can to understand what they're doing. And so those are things that I really, really enjoy. And in some sense, a VC or a tech investor, you do that every day.
Mm, mm,
It's like, yeah, like I found something that really matches with a lot of the things that I seem to really enjoy.
Mm.
mm,
Yes, sir. Yeah, I know we're coming up on well, 7 for us here and 4 for you, so we don't
mm.
want to take up, so much time, but I guess I'm thinking of kind of a wrap-up question. Do you have one in mind, Eddie? I have kind of something.
Take it away, my man.
Yeah. Well, it's not much, but what do you think, Tay? Like now we've kind of gone back to your story and your life. What are a handful of things that you think have stayed true since the beginning, if that makes sense? Like now that you're at this stage, a solid place in your job, happy in your marriage, which is wonderful, happy as a father. What are certain things that you would stand by in terms of, let's say, values or uh, just certain truths that have like kind of stood the test of time.
I think just hard work is a good thing. Grit, hard work, being responsible, accountable. Um, yeah, whatever motivation you need to do great work in family, friends, work, whatever it is, I think just try to do it in a really, really high effort way.
Mm,
Hmm.
That continues to be something I really believe in. One of the phrases I really like is, how do you increase the odds of your success? I used to think that there were formulas for success, like you're supposed to do these 7 things to be successful. But then I think over time, and especially in investing, you realize that there is a lot of luck involved in life and in work. And so then on the flip side, you can't also live life saying, well, it's all about luck, so like, who cares? Right?
Mhm.
And so the general mode of life these days for me, and maybe this has been true for the majority of my life that I can remember, is like, what are things that I can do to increase my success or chances of success, right? I can't control the outcome, but at least I can do the small things on a day-to-day basis to increase the odds of that. And I think hard work has to be a big ingredient to it. And so work hard, play hard, just give it your all. I think that's a big part of what I believe in. And then the other thing is just around being kind. And I don't know, like, I think everyone has a different definition of what kind is, but just like be nice to each other, just be kind, be nice, try to give back. If people randomly reach out to you, just I don't know, spend some time talking to them. I think it becomes harder and harder in earnest because life gets busy with family and
Right.
whatever. But like, I think I don't know if karma is the right word, but like there is something about just living a life with kindness at the core of it. Like just be nice to each other, and hopefully that helps others, and then hopefully that actually comes back to you to serve you in a positive way as well. I mean, those two things probably come to mind. I mean, maybe the last thing is just being very grateful. Like, I think it all kind of ties to each other, but like, yeah, like there's just no singular reason that one's life looks certain ways, right? There are a lot of other environmental inputs to it, whether it's family, your upbringing, your economic situation, your social situation, maybe the country you're born in. Like, I mean, there are a lot of different random things that have happened to dictate the way your life looks like today. And so I think if you take that giant zoom out version of life, you're like, wow, like we should be very grateful that we can actually have a very pleasant 1 hour long conversation like this with no ramifications.
Right.
Mhm.
That is actually like a pretty grateful thing for many people on this earth. So yeah.
Well, Tay, on those 3 points, I'll just say we're very grateful that you took this call and being kind enough to take this call.
And
And
I
Steven.
promised, to work hard. I
You
promise
guys worked
I'm
really
gonna work
hard to make it happen, so I appreciate it.
Tay, well, thank you so much again, man.
Yeah,
Really,
sure.
really appreciate it.
All right. It's
It was
good to
a
see you
great catching
guys.
up.
Yeah, no, it was
Yeah,
Yeah,
really good to catch
fun.
up.
All
yeah.
right.
Yes,
Come join us
Appreciate
in
it.
New York.
All right, we'll do. Yeah. Let me know if
Yeah.
you guys are ever in the Bay Area.
yeah, I'll
And
definitely let you know if we're in the Bay. We'll let you
all
know.
of our
Thank you,
many,
Tay.
many listeners, the big crowd that's
That's
listening to this.
right. Subscribe, hit the like button, whatever,
Yeah,
all that
Down
yeah,
stuff.
below.
Yeah. Thank you, Tay.
All
Appreciate you.
right. Sit
See
tight.
yeah.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.